Okay, thank you for setting the stage for us, Dr. Zimpher. And I think we would all agree that education is the most important thing to help us move forward in the most positive way. So what I think I'll do, if you don't mind, let's just start with, you got it, Mandy? I'll go ahead and take it. Thank you. If you don't mind, let's just start with introductions. We've got our panel with us. Kathy Hebda is unable to join us today. She's been texting me through the weekend and up until Monday, and she's not feeling well, so made the great decision to not come. So she sent her responses to questions and insights. So if we get a chance, I'll provide that, but she's really sorry she can't be here. Dr. Stuart Rayfield is here with us, Vice Chancellor of Leadership and Institutional Development from the University System of Georgia. I've had a chance to connect with Dr. Rayfield over time. Dr. Monty Sullivan is here with us, who is the president of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, and we've had great connections over the years with you and your institutions, and really appreciate that. Dr. Jim Purcell had an opportunity to be introduced to you, and great work that you're doing in Alabama Commission of Higher Education. So very distinguished panel to join today to continue the conversation. So I think I'll start, I think we'll jump right in and start with, yesterday when we were working with the panelist of presidents, we asked them this question. So wanted to ask you all the same question to see what your perspective is from the system level, but what do you think is the one thing, and it's hard to get to one, but the one thing that's most pressing as we think about the current to the future state of higher education? So we're at current to future state. What's the most pressing thing in front of us, and why? Dr. Rayfield, we'll start with you.
All right, well, thanks for having me here. When I was considering this question, the one word that kept popping into my mind was relevancy. And from a system perspective, I'm from the University System of Georgia. We have 26 institutions. They all have unique missions. And so the relevancy question is not just the relevancy of a single institution, but really balancing the needs of our state among the 26 institutions. And so we have institutions that are primarily two-year institutions, coupled with a handful of Research One institutions, and just about everything in between. And so understanding the relevancy and the need for each of those institutions and the importance of those missions. And so as I think about the future of higher education from current to the future, it's really defining that relevancy so that those institutions can live into their missions and really capture the audiences that they are intended to capture.
That's great, thank you, and thanks for doing that. And Dr. Sullivan, if you would give us a little bit of background on your system as you're answering that question, that'd be great.
Absolutely, relevancy, very, very good choice. Thank you to the folks from Stuart. Thank you for an opportunity to be here. Thank you for the tribute to Renee Cintron. If I can share just a very quick story. I'm coming across the bridge a few minutes ago just before I arrived here at the hotel, and I got a message on Facebook from Kara Cintron, who was one of 1,117 graduates at Delgado Community College yesterday. That young lady needed one semester to graduate, and she and her dad had this conversation 1,000 times. She went back to Delgado in the spring semester after her dad passed December the 6th, and she graduated yesterday. That is what this is about. We're 12 two-year colleges across the state of Louisiana. We enroll about 160,000 students, graduate about 32,000 students a year, but we have walked through what I believe is one of the most difficult set of financial circumstances and performance circumstances to be found anywhere in the country. That doesn't mean we have all the answers. It simply means we have the experience and the scars of having walked through some very difficult times. The one point that I would make to you in terms of what is most important to us, at a very foundational level, leadership is the key to advancing organizations and accomplishing anything of size and scale and scope. So let's pass on that one and assume that that one is required no matter what. The one that I look at is the transformation point that Nancy made a few minutes ago. How do institutions transform? As two-year colleges, we largely were built in the image of universities. But yet our mission is very different. So why were we built in the image of another institution? And how do we identify the elements of the institution as we have been built that we want to keep? And how do we identify those that we want to develop and innovate to look at the next iteration? To me, the question of the business model is how do you sustain transformation? Without a business model change, we will continue to count and pay faculty to teach to empty seats, because that's largely what we do. More empty seats than full seats in many of our institutions these days. We will continue to charge students on a per credit hour basis without regard to the value or the benefit of the credential. All of these are downfalls that ignore the relationship between our institutions and the market. Are we willing and able to be market responsive? To me, that is the key question.
Thank you.
Well, Monty and I were in Louisiana about the same time as the 2008-2011 recession hit, and it was a traumatic time. And one of the things I think that happened in that state, which is really about relevance, it's really about transformation, is they had to do that. There's been a lot of states that were so systems or institutions that were sheltered from really the real hurt of that particular time, because the structures were not designed to really protect them. And I'll give you an example here in Alabama, where tuition was decided by the local trustees. So no matter what the cuts were at the states, the institutions were fine, all the faculty fine, all the librarians were happy, everybody was living the dream. The problem was they did it on the backs of all the students. So Alabama actually has the 6th highest tuition rate in the country, even though we're a state that has lots of poverty and all the things that you all read about Alabama. It is about being pragmatic and being practical. We actually had a big conversation in our state the other day about workforce and education, and this lady who's a brilliant lady, economist for the Federal Reserve, we were being very pragmatic about here's the trigger, here's what we need to do to change. And she says, well, what I would rather do is have all these local communities have conversations themselves and just think about it. Let the box open up big and let them dream about the future. And my response to her was really that we have practical situations right now, pragmatic situations that need to be made, decisions that need to be made that really impact the future of this community. And we don't necessarily have the luxury anymore in the modern world of transformation to just sit for years and years and think about solutions. We need to be very pragmatic and address those issues very quickly.
Wow, I don't know where to land here, because every time somebody said something, I go, well, I don't know, then maybe I should say something. So not leading an institution currently, I have the freedom to say that I think the biggest challenge we have is getting out of our own way, getting outside of ourselves. And as a teacher and a teacher educator for the first half of my career, our relationship literally from birth to career is where we have to land. We have to pay a lot more attention to early childhood and how students come to kindergarten, let alone how seniors in high school come to college, let alone how college graduates or college some course students but not a degree student comes to the workforce. And I think we, in the challenges of our own sector, which are immense, and they're all played out on a daily basis, as Jim says, we still have to find a way to get above the fray and work on the connectivity between that pipeline, which we know is decreasing, but there are still a lot of kids who graduate high school and don't go to college. So even though there may be an enrollment cliff, we're still missing people. Our graduation rate right now in this country of college, 2-year, 4-year, or credential, is 51%. That's 49% of the population that's not getting what we have to offer. And it starts very early and it runs very late. So I think my focus, which I have the luxury of doing because I'm not doing this day-to-day thing, is to be a voice for looking beyond our boundaries to the rest of how the world gets educated. And think big about what our real role is in this society.
I think really important. You know, one thing, and just maybe you all can help us think through this. We work in with K-12 districts as well as in higher education, and it really we have over 100 districts across the country that we work with, but we have not found a way to get the groups together. We just not that it still feels separate. Let me put it that way. And to try to pull people together, we're still trying to figure out what does that look like. So, and it's going to be really important, I think, for the future. But if, as you all think about that, I would love your insight because we have a platform, I think, to bring that together. So, as you're thinking staying on the topic a little bit, Dr. Rayfield, you know, let's talk about external and internal factors that influence your decisions. So you all are making decisions every day, you know, probably paying a cost for some of those decisions in particular ways constantly. But how are the external and internal factors influencing the decisions you make at the system level, and how is that different, let's say, from 5 years ago?
So 5 years ago, I wasn't sitting at the system. I was on a campus. But I think that as we think about both the internal factors, and when I talk about internal, I'm talking about internal to the system. And again, it goes back to the type of system that I think that the university system of Georgia is. I think those internal factors really, as we make decisions, have to be about balancing the needs across our 26 institutions. We have spent a lot of time in the past in a much more decentralized model. And I think over time we have learned that in order for us to be more efficient and to maximize our resources to the benefit of students, that we have to centralize some of the things, and that there's a real benefit to doing so. So as we balance kind of our internal constituents, being our 26 campuses, I think trying to understand what are those decisions that we can make as a system that can apply broadly versus what are those decisions that really need to be made at the institution level. During the pandemic, we became a very centralized organization to respond to the pandemic. Our institutions really had very little freedom to be able to make decisions related to the pandemic. And I think now is the time for us to really move back into a space where we allow for more autonomy based on the mission, so that our institutional presidents, two of whom are sitting in this room, have the ability to manage their institutions in a way that meets the mission and the goals of their specific institution. But I think from an external perspective, we're in the state of Georgia. Right now, we're in a highly politicized environment in our state. And I think really navigating it and continuing to be seen as a strength of our state, very much connected to the economic development of our state. Our new chancellor, who is also a former governor in our state, has really talked about how so goes the success of the university system of Georgia, so goes the success of the economic development of our state. And so I think as we think about our role within the state, connecting the value of what we do in the classroom to the economic prosperity of the citizens of our state, of our students, and ultimately of our communities is vitally important. But I think balancing and navigating those external relationships could not be more important than it is today. And I think that our former chancellor, our acting chancellor, and now our current chancellor, all of whom have been in office during the past year, have done a pretty phenomenal job of balancing that, and that came forward in our budget this year. We saw about a 26% increase in the budget in the state of Georgia for higher education, and it was, I think, a real nod to the value of the work that we're doing, and the tie to how we are inextricably linked. The success of what we do really impacts the state. So from an external perspective, I think those are the types of relationships that we're navigating. Internally, it's really balancing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well said. And your comment to relevancy, it seems, going back to the last question, relevancy and staying abreast of your community, from my perspective, that external field, that's where institutions improve. There's a down and in portion that clearly is the improvement science piece that this organization does as well as any. But in order to know what that institution should look like, my experience has been you need to look out into the field of who you're serving and who's paying the bill. And what I realize is there's not a president, there's not a vice president, there's not a chancellor, there's not a faculty member who is paying the bill. Let's be real here. This is about transforming institutions to serve people. Our biggest fault in higher education over the years has been our unwillingness to lay out the picture of this is what education really can accomplish on behalf of people. All people, not a select few. 100 years ago, we said high school was mandatory. Today, we have a promise movement that is saying college is almost mandatory, folks. If you can't survive in this economy without it. The days of student evaluations being the performance metric that we're looking at, look up and out of the institution. How many times have I seen a new college leader walk into a college and say, I've got to fix everything within the college before I can go out and sell it in the community? Wrong. You spend your first year, your honeymoon, if you will, internal, fixing the warts of the college that, guess what? They're not likely to be fixed internally. It's the combination of the external and the internal where you can make real change to colleges. From an external perspective, I spend 90% of my time dealing with the external. The reason for that, from a system perspective, the systemness, is running interference for my chancellors. My college leaders need someone to run interference on issues as broad as you can name. Critical race theory, good example. Socially, today, we are dealing with issues that we would have never even talked about in our state capital 5 years ago. Just this past 2 sessions, legalization of marijuana, legalization of prostitution. Didn't pass, but you got to have that conversation in the Capitol. It's a different day, it's a different place than we've ever been before. You as leaders have to be able to engage in that discussion without being offensive, but still at the same time know the impact that it can have and will have for your institutions. That internal-external dynamic is at the crux of the success of systemness and institutions within systems. Giving chancellors like Rick Bateman the opportunity to go sit with local leaders and have a hard conversation about, do we outsource our maintenance and janitorial services? That didn't happen at a state level. I simply had to run interference to make sure that the state politics didn't get in the way of a local decision. That's the yin and the yang of systemness. That's what must be there in order for us to be able to have scale and accomplish the broader mission that we know is to deliver the nation's middle class. I believe we're sitting on the precipice of major investments from the federal and state governments, but with an expectation. Your reserve balances are going to be large come June 30. And folks are going to look at those reserve balances and sort of sit back on their haunches a bit. As leaders, how will you motivate them to change the business model? As leaders, how will you transform your institution when you have resources? Because let me tell you, it's hell to do it when you don't have resources. We've been there. It has been a tough sled. But when you have resources, we have to be thinking about how to change this institution. Here's a very basic metric. What does it cost you to generate a credit hour? If your CFO can't help you answer that question, we got other issues. We got to dig down a little deeper and understand. So again, external perspective to determine relevance, but also digging into the college so that you can sort of fix it from the outside in, if you will.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think Monty's rocking and rolling today, huh? And I've actually seen him be this passionate, 7, 8 years ago when I worked with him. So I'm inspired that he's still got the moxie. And I think that's what all of us want to do. And I sort of want to do a contrast on those of you who are leaders today. What happened when this COVID crisis came is it was so big that actually all the people that usually threw rocks at anything a leader wanted sort of said, hey, this is too big for us. I'm abdicating, and you be in charge. And they were very willing to let you be in charge. And it was, to me, easier to address COVID. Like we did distance learning over, 2-3 weeks. We were able to do all those things because it was so big. What's going to happen as we recover from all that economically is you're going to be in a situation where everybody's back in their own kingdoms, and we have to address that. Most importantly, what this group really talks about is what is mission critical. And I would use that as a question you ask all your people every day. What is mission critical to us? And then the other is, does our community around us mimic the successes we think that we're going to provide to a world? And I always see there's some communities that have great universities and great schools of education, but they have very bad schools around them. They have a lot of poverty. They have not chosen to address that. I mean, if you ever go to Yale, New Haven, it's like there's a nuclear bomb right outside all the affluence there, and they haven't addressed the social ills that are there. We all have to be a part of that world that's out there, and if we don't, then it's an indictment on us. So to me, mission critical is what's happening outside our campus, and how do we align ourselves to that.
Nice.
Boy, this is really good advice, good perspective from these amazing leaders. I think in addition to all that's been said, we run on the lifeblood of our faculty and our staff. We've got a lot of battles around tenure and promotion, and there are many state-level initiatives that strike at whether tenure will survive as it currently exists. In my own opinion, our adjuncts have been relegated to a position that doesn't speak to their worth. But I think as long as we call them adjuncts and we don't review the whole system of how it is to run a university with faculty delivering a lot of our product, we really have to think hard about how to engage a variety of people and expertise that will build the great university that looks at the outside and the inside. I think in some respects we're not ready. We're not prepared to look at the outside. We are quite sheltered. As a faculty member, I was one, you were one, you remember. We lived in our own little department and our own little work, and we couldn't see the outside. We weren't exposed to the outside. So I think part of our challenge as leaders is to bring the key decision makers, but I would include not just tenured faculty, but whatever clinical, I'd like to call them all clinical. They're typically applied. I know at Ohio State, the only faculty who could be called the clinical faculty were in the medical school. So I was an executive dean over, get this, business, law, engineering, agriculture, education, social work. They didn't have anything they thought was in common. So the thing we decided to do together was to get the clinical title out of the medical school and into the other colleges and departments. Now, this may be different in the two-year environment, but I think it's still, we don't engage all the capability that we need to make the modern day university work as an external and internal agency. And given everything people have said, I think we can't neglect the fact that we're in a new learning environment for all those people who actually meet the students day to day. That's a big on-the-ground task, and it starts with engaging those key stakeholders in decision making. So we can only front for so much. I think we learned a lot from COVID. I think you're right. I wouldn't go too far back, Georgia. It'll, in some brutal moment, the New York State legislature and SUNY decided not to put the word SUNY in front of every campus. So now I'm a tenured faculty member at the University at Albany. Really? At? What pronoun is that? Your preposition, excuse me. At? Of is the one you typically use, but they took the SUNY off. They took the systemness away. And to build it back to where it is right now, given what you did do for your campuses during COVID, is something to kind of hang on to as you navigate well, I liked what you said, Stuart. It's a middle ground, and we have to find that middle ground. But I guess my real point is, let's engage the people who are delivering the services that create the products that we are representing. Very important.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your role. So take it away from just the internal, external environment, but talk about your role and think about your role as a vice chancellor or chancellor, and how has that changed over the last 5 years, or just as you're looking back, you say, wow, it's so different now than it was before. What would those changes be?
So I'll start. I joined our system office back in 2018 and had been on several of our campuses in a variety of roles. But one of our presidents and I got to be very close during a consolidation, and he and I had some of our initial conversations really rested on this idea that he hates the system office, absolutely hates the system office. He will tell you to your face that he hates the system office. So it was a real hard day when I had to call and let him know that I was moving to the dark side of the system office. But I think one of the things that he said really has stuck with me, and I tell this story a lot. He said, I've really tried to, talk to our chancellors, and he was our longest serving president, to really understand that the culture of the system office, it is as though the institutions are in service to the system office. And the reverse of that has to be the case, because the system office does not enroll one student, it doesn't graduate a student, and so what I think has changed the most for us, and our presidents may say different, but it certainly has been part of my personal mission, being part of the system office, is to really understand my role of being in service to the institutions and the leadership of the institutions. And that's taken a variety of different looks, and there are different ways that we can do that. But allowing the institutions to be able to focus on their primary mission of educating students, knowledge development, knowledge creation, knowledge delivery, and knowledge application, allowing them to truly focus on that. And to your point, Nancy, just really kind of pulling back and saying, where are those opportunities for us to be able to take on some of the behind-the-scenes work so that you can truly focus on students and their success. So I think as I think about how my role has changed, I don't know that it has. I've been there long enough to see a dramatic shift, but I do think the philosophy from which many of the folks up in our system office are trying to approach their work is that we are in service to the institutions and in service to the state of Georgia.
Yeah, thank you.
Very well said. If you go back to 2008-9, Louisiana's community and technical colleges sort of at a high water mark in terms of our funding until this year. So in that 2008-2009 timeframe, if you fast forward 8 years, we lost $80 million in state general fund. At the same time, we doubled the tuition rate. If you're selling snow cones today for $1 and tomorrow they're $2, what do you think your customer is going to ask you? What's in that snow cone today that wasn't there yesterday, right? Pretty fundamental question that many economists have made a living on that question, right? So when you think about that context for a second, I walked into this role 8 years ago. We were in the belly of that 2014 timeframe, having just come through some very difficult times. Morale was down, and yet there were some principles that we had in place that at the time I had no idea just how valuable they were. So when I walk into a system and it's clear to me that the board restates as members, not as a collective necessarily, but individual members, these communities own these colleges. That is a real simple principle. But buddy, let me tell you, when you start to implement, it can get sticky. But the board already had that as a principle in hand. The second point, your view is oftentimes dependent upon the seat from which you sit. I'll give you a quick story. Chris Broadwater, former legislator in Louisiana, an attorney, he's been an incredible leader for us in a workforce policy role within the board office. I asked him about 2 years ago to go to Louisiana Delta as an interim. He did that. I have to tell you, when he left the board office, he would ask the question, what the hell's wrong with those colleges? Every day, on any issue. He gets to Louisiana Delta, you know what his question was?
Yeah.
What the hell's wrong with the system office? That's it. So Chris goes to Louisiana Delta. He comes back to the board office, and I watch his evolution. And you know where he landed? Exactly what you said earlier, in the middle. Because we're all in this together. And so what has changed for me? Certainly the politics have dialed up. Certainly the finances have changed. But let me give you a couple of things that I think you should be thinking about from a system perspective. Why do programs need to be institution-based? I can tell you why. Federal financial aid. That's the only reason. Why is it that we shouldn't take an entire curriculum of 12 colleges in Louisiana and deliver it to 4.6 million people? Why do we need a college brand attached to that? I'm not suggesting to you that the board office is going to deliver those programs, because one of the second principles the board will tell you is we have no students and we have no programs, no faculty at the board office. We're in support of those colleges. We're the Mars Corporation, right? We go out and market Snickers. We don't market the Mars Corporation. So our work has been about trying to make sure that colleges can do the work that they do in the field every day. What was probably most helpful in that work was not only the fact that our board already had some of those principles in place. Joe May, who was the previous leader, did an incredible job of developing that board. But the other part of it was developing a common vision among 12 college leaders, a board chair, and myself that said, these are the things that matter to us. Because once you can focus outward on the work, it becomes much less about individual institutions. Final point that I'll make is that the board's members recite constantly. Colleges do not have needs. Boy, let me tell you, when you have somebody come in from another state and they hear a board member say colleges do not have needs, Chancellor's hair pops up on the back of their neck, right? Concern. But here's what the board means by that. It's not that there aren't needs. It's not the college that has a need. It's the community and the people of the state. It's the people who are paying taxes who expect something from us as organizations. That's who has needs. Our needs are simply to have the resources to deliver on a mission, because we are a means to an end. We're much more than that, but a means to an end is what taxpayers see and policymakers see. And so from my perspective, that politics has dialed up more so than I have ever seen as well. And people are questioning the notion of whether education is the long-term answer. That's crazy to think that we would even be having that discussion. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined that we would have an open dialogue about whether the baccalaureate degree was necessary. Are you kidding? The one point that I think we have to do, have to make sure is in place as leaders, is we cannot be separated. We have to move together. We can no longer be in a place where short-term certifications or badges against baccalaureate degrees. That's not the point. The point is to get students into an institution, get a credential, continue to work, continue to learn, continue to grow. It's the career pathways model that we've been watching. We're seeing institutions flip degree programs where we no longer start with math and English, the courses that, for whatever reason, over the years have been really difficult for our students to pass initially. Put those courses on the back end. Guess what? It was the faculty who told us that, no administrator. Those are some of the kinds of things that I think from a system perspective have changed dramatically over the last 5 years, and I think we can expect similar kinds of change over the next 3 to 5 years, not as a result of pandemic and some of the things that we've seen, but on the fiscal and financial side.
Yeah, that's good.
Very good, Monty. Monty always does good stuff. And I think for us, and Monty was there when I was the commissioner there, and it was all about compliance. You know, this is the rules, this is our way or the highway, you know, get in line and make it happen. And I think What's happened since then is in all the states is we've come less more about compliance. And I will say that when I was there the first year, and it didn't happen, it happened right before I got there, but the vote was there when I was there. They closed 240 programs because of low degree production. And one of them in Louisiana was the French program at LSU. And you can see how painful that was. I mean, you're really destroying the culture as much as one little program. And actually, they had a French house, and people lived there. And there was all kind of things that just were not understanding of how the world works. I think what's happening now is in higher ed from the commissions or coordinating boards is we encourage by incentives. We say, hey, this is something that we want to have tried out in an institution. Who wants to play? And we give people an opportunity to participate. And a lot of times I go directly to faculty. For OER, we said, which faculties want to do a study on whether OER is better for your students or not, and provide some incentives for that to happen. We've done FAFSA completion in Alabama. Everybody from high school is supposed to fill out a FAFSA or they don't graduate. Mm-hmm. Even though that's a K through 12 idea, the actual implementation of that comes from us at the coordinating board because we look at FAFSA information. Mm-hmm. So all of it is about providing service to the institutions, incentivizing them to do the things that we think are really working in the world. We actually give incentives for people to go to chamber meetings and go to workforce, regional workforce board meetings. And that's the thing we have to do is fund the things that we want you to do, because we have to be very directive. And that is, you know, the one thing is if you allow the campuses to decide, they get to decide based on what their priorities and needs, and that was talked about a little bit yesterday. Mm-hmm. What I have to do is I have to be very prescriptive on the little extra money that I get to target really what change needs to happen that I believe in the state, and incentivize institutions to participate and hopefully convert them in the process. I used to do this all by charisma, management by charisma. It didn't work. So this money thing seems to help a little bit.
So is the question, what have we changed? How have things changed the last 5 years?
It's and thinking, Nancy, from, you know, I asked them from their roles currently, you know, how has that changed? So from your perspective, as you've been in that position and now you're looking at chancellors across the board, you know, how has that role changed in the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I think this panel is an indication of the change.
Yeah,
I don't think that in the previous decades we've paid much attention to the capacity of systems that was brought to light by COVID. I think it's been a special time, and I can't help but think, and I don't know whether this makes me a Republican or a Democrat or a Federalist versus a states' rights person, but good God, the federal government had to play a role in COVID, and it didn't. And look what happened. This is a tragedy. And it was left, I mean, you don't play necessarily in the intercollegiate athletic world. I'm on the night commission for intercollegiate athletics, and the mess that has been created by athletes being able to use their name, image, and likeness to make money sounds a lot like pay for play, set that aside. There's no federal policy on how this is going to be applied. So your favorite football team is now recruiting players based on how much money they can make using their name, image, and likeness. All I'm saying about it, without even delving into what it is that the regulatory absence, the absence of a cohesive, coherent policy on either COVID, you pick, or name, image, and likeness, or a financial aid policy that makes sense, suggests that not only are we now recognizing that systems have a positive role to play in transformation, gathering the systems up to have a federal voice and to talk to the National Governors Association and the local legislator organization really could matter to us all if we were of one voice about what needs to change with FAFSA, financial aid, debt recovery, you name it. There are so many policies. The fact that we've not been able to pass this Higher Education Act in all this time suggests that we are a bit chaotic in our sector if we were to put the blame on ourselves. We have not found an effective way to organize such that we can challenge policies that are very much in our way and enable policies like a better FAFSA, and a FAFSA that's actually you can fill out and use. I mean, this seems kind of obvious, but I don't think, I guess I'm to the stage in my long journey and now looking outside in. We do need some vehicles that pull us together for the kind of advocacy we need as a sector of the whole. And if you put it most simply, that's really what getting these systems together is all about. What can we use our shoulder-to-shoulder, armed collectivity to change in ways that gives us the freedom to be all that we can be? So that's a big change. And I think it's recent. I think it's not 5 years. I think it's last year. Mm-hmm. I think it's COVID.
Yeah.
And what a shock to this country that we couldn't get our collective act together to have a unified policy on vaccination, masks, et cetera, even if we had to modify it to bring everybody under the tent. We didn't do that. Instead, we went our separate ways, and we're still living the dream.
Yeah. So as you think about continuing down a little bit the conversation, but back up to the system level, and there's a lot of talk. We're kind of in that 5 year, when COVID hit, we were in that transition of 5 years, the 2020 to the next 5 years. And so we knew in the last 5 years what those accountability measures were at the institutions, and we were trying to achieve those accountability measures. We're working toward what those accountability measures are, and I personally don't think they're quite as defined as what they used to be, which could be good. But what do you, from a systems perspective, if I'm working alongside as a thought partner with a president, and we're really trying to hit the goals and those accountability measures that matter, that's what the measures that matter, what are those in higher ed right now?
So I think historically we've looked at graduation rates, we've looked at retention rates, but we have done a really poor job of capturing outcomes after students graduate. And all of our students come to us wanting something. They want a degree to either help them get into graduate school or to help them get a job, go into the workforce. There are very few students who show up at our doors without wanting to leave with something to advance their lives in the future. And so I think that public higher education, especially 4-year, I think our technical college system in the state of Georgia has done a pretty good job of connecting the outcomes after a student graduates. But I think that we've done a really poor job of doing that. And so I know in the state of Georgia this will be a focus. And so as we think about measuring performance and what does success look like, it's going to go beyond just how many students did we retain year over year and how many students did we graduate, but how many students are actually getting to do the things that they had hoped to do when they arrived at our door in the first place. So I think this is going to be a real paradigm shift. I think it's going to be hard. Because I think it's going to be hard to measure, and it's going to be really incomplete data that we're going to have to use, because it's hard to track every single one of your alumni and what they're doing 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, once they leave you. But we've got some glimpses that I think, so I think as we move forward, the data, and we've not really had a whole lot of conversations around data, but I think being able to understand, capture, and utilize big data around our institutions and our outcomes, I can't overstate the need for that. So as we move forward, as we think about performance and what does success look like, I think it's going to be about outcomes beyond just getting your credential.
Thank you.
Ditto. I think the changes that have occurred really, I think about 2013. Jim was commissioner in Louisiana, and he did this research study. And it seemed harmless, except for the fact that he took credentials by zip code, by level, and he compared them to the wage data that the students completing those credentials earned. And the results, some of my colleagues were not happy with. And they asked, please don't ever do that again. And maybe didn't ask, maybe told you not to ever do it again, right? That was a change, if you think about it. So in that time frame, in 2013, if you had asked someone, how's your institution doing, they would have probably given you a couple of metrics as it related to student success. Retention rate, graduation rate. A couple of things to think about. Number one, retention is a terrible word. It sounds like someone wants to be maintained in a penal institution, right? You want to be retained? Let's come up with a little better terminology there. Look, the second one, graduation rate, built around the athletic realm of the NCAA and national, trying to make sure that we're able to provide common and positive kinds of experiences for those student athletes. The graduation rate metric didn't really apply to two-year colleges. But guess what's happened across time? As we've shifted toward the outcomes of things like income, what we have ultimately gotten to is a place where we pause and go, wait a minute, it's not about 18-year-olds anymore. It's about everybody. It's about adults. So now instead of talking about how many kids graduate high school next year, 40,000 in my state, about half of them are going on to college, as was said earlier. But I've got 1.1 million working age adults, 25 to 64, with a high school diploma or less. Yeah. And you want to know the real problem? As a nation, in your state, my state, all of our states combined, 64 million working age Americans with a high school diploma or less. What in the world do you do in the middle of a pandemic when you've hustled to try to pull together a couple of jobs to make it work, and the pandemic took those away, and now you're struggling? The question isn't, what are we studying down at the local college? The question is, what's the job you're going to have? What's the career? What is the opportunity? What is the change for your family? So as we begin to think about that metric, in the state of Louisiana, it was referenced earlier through the leadership of our commissioner, Kim Hunter-Reed, we now developed a prosperity index. Is it perfect? No. In fact, you said it very well. We have limited data sources, but to be able to describe the condition of our people, why do we spend millions of dollars on institutions of higher education? To improve the lives of our people. But yet what metrics show us that? How in the world does a graduation rate determine or describe the impact you've had on a student? It doesn't. It's a frequency distribution. Did they complete or did they not? That's not descriptive of the impact that you've had at your institution. So those metrics have changed dramatically across time, and I submit to you they're going to continue to change. When we talk about systemness, as Nancy mentioned a few minutes ago, it is exceptionally difficult to change policy in this nation with membership organizations. Because what happens, and I'm not going to throw out the alphabet soup, all of you know your own alphabet soup that you're members of. When you're members of an organization, and there are a couple of thousand of them across the country, and everybody has an ask, and there's a list, there's not really an ask. There's no strategic ask. Here's one for you. The two largest funds in the nation to fix that $64 million or 64 million person problem I just pointed out, Pell and WIOA. And for whatever reason, from a policy point of view in this nation, we continue to advance those separately. Why? There's no reason. Those are the talent funds of this nation. We've got to be able to come together as institutions, as systems, and across, including no party, to add to your list a minute ago, to make sure that people understand this is not about politics. This is about how we advance our people and how we advance this democracy. If we don't learn anything else from Ukraine and the Russia circumstance, we got to know that without education, democracy will fail. It's up to you and me.
Oh, I'll take both. No, I think one of the things that we've been trying to address by actually doing these employment outcome reports is actually telling the truth about the value of a degree. And so every state I've been in, and I haven't stayed in states very long, so I sort of get run off or I leave in advance, but you can do 1 year from graduation and 5 years from graduation and sort of see what difference did we make in the lives of those individuals, what degrees matter. I've gone now and actually, when I see numbers that are very low, I'll go and meet with the social workers and say, why do we have such low wages and why is there a low pass rate? Why? And same thing with education. Two things just happened recently in our state where we actually had a situation where employment outcomes report came out, and we had a legislature looked at the data and said, oh my gosh, we only keep like 50% of our graduates. Why are they not staying in Alabama? And I asked him, I says, can I do a research on it? And he said, sure, let's do it. We asked the juniors and seniors who are about to graduate, what is your impressions of the state? And what is important to you in making a decision about your life and future and your career? And you know what the reason was? The people that, well, everybody, but especially the people that were leaving the state, they didn't jive with what our politics was. They wanted to have, more appreciation for diversity. They didn't want politics to be ugly all the time as a third sport. That was an opportunity to really communicate to the greater world in Alabama about how you really think about the future and how your young people are being disenfranchised about your state, and you have to bring forward. The good news for Alabama is we have all the Hyundais and the Toyotas and the Mazdas and any international car builder except BMW is in our state. And they all want advanced manufacturing, they want education, but it's all about having some credential, a micro-credential at least, where you know something technical and you're proficient in something other than perhaps your general degree. A lot of it is zoning in on those things and measuring them. The other thing we do now is we actually track graduates that did leave the state and see what happens to them. And so we actually work with the credit card companies because they're big brother, right? And we can actually get 250 columns of information on every one of our graduates, which we don't. I did that once under a federal grant, but federal grants aren't as good as they used to be. But that information allows you to know what is the life and times of your graduates who do wander off, and what can we do to bring them back. And we actually have an initiative now in this state where we're going to be contacting people from out of state who are in engineering or in the sciences that we need in our state. And we know who's we can get because we know their salary, we know their family income, we know everything about their lives that allows us to target specifically and just say, mama's calling, and it's time to come home and be a part of our future. We hope you come and be a part of that. And I think that's something that helps us as a system, as a state, really believe in our state and think about a bigger and brighter future.
Well, if I were you, I would be thinking, I don't really get what the system of systems thing is all about. Monty's right. There are all these membership organizations that have their agenda, and that's their role, and they gain membership by being a good advocate for what matters most to that particular constituency. Now, we do have the Higher Education Secretariat, 45 members or so, and every once in a while they try to get their act together on legislation, but as you know, they were divided on the college promise. So there we were facing what is probably the next level of education required of all Americans, 2 more years, but we couldn't agree on that. And so what do you think they do at the federal government when we can't agree on things? So the pipe dream of the power of systems is that we could find a level of agreement on a very small, focused set of measures. 3. Now, what we're doing to arrive by December at an agreed way to measure prosperity, leaning on Louisiana, but not an index of many. What's the one? We have a Gates report on the value of higher education. That's really measuring prosperity too. We've got that. We've got the very well-known Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce. They have measures. In fact, it's their measures that are feeding the Lumina measure, which, by the way, we're not going to make. If we're at 51% of their goal by 2025, we're not going to be at 60 because it moves at about 2%, every 5 years, something like that. So the idea that we could get 50 or 60, our systems across the country, to agree on 3 measures. One for completion, which includes what to measure. What is a credential of value? We can't agree on that, I don't think, yet. We talk about it. At least we're talking about it. which is a good thing. What is a measure of prosperity? This is the post-college workforce, life force, quality of life. And the third one is kind of an effort to be part of the cost of college debate. It's not really an outcome per se. It's a challenge to make ourselves efficient enough that people can afford to engage in us. But measures 1 and 2, if agreed to nationally, and if the systems are willing to share their data, their baseline data now, and disaggregate it. We haven't said that today, but of course it's about the gaps. Of course it's about the gaps. Zero tolerance for the gaps. Imagine if we could just get our heads together on 2 measures, and then multiple ways to achieve those measures, all the autonomy you want to get yourself there, but we'd like to help along the way, learning more about improvement as one methodology, not the only one. We could maybe do something, but living with presidents and chancellors, as I have for many, many years, as most of us are experienced, you know what job 1 is. It's to get the attention of your various constituency about the high quality of your institution. We do talk about our challenges and our problems, but not over excessively daunting the belief that we're a good thing. That's part of our job. But I think at this point, I think I'm to the point where we need to get organized and we need to have a common voice. Because if Monty goes on the road, you can tell he's quite passionate and quite compelling. I just want us all to be saying the same thing. And if we try to be a little more aggressive and political about what we stand for and what our North Star is and how we're going to get there 10 years from now, not 2 years, not 2025, but maybe 2030, that dial is going to move faster because 51% is not a bragging point. And that ought to motivate us incredibly.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's go opposite direction, and we have about 9 minutes left. Jim, let's start with you. The last question I'll ask, if just kind of in a quick summary, you've all, Jim, Monty, and Stuart, you've got your representative chancellors and presidents, deans in the audience. What advice would you give them as they continue in ways that they could achieve excellence and as they can be successful?
Well, I think the big thing is really just addressing what is mission critical for your institution. What do you represent? What is your product? How does it actually connect to your community? Are you a good steward of your community? And then implement them. And it's really the fidelity of implementation. One of the things we had in our state was the FAFSA completion project that was announced by K through 12 school board. But our agency was the one that actually has the information. And we spent, $1.1 million so far this year in making sure that every kid in the state got an opportunity to know that college was available to them through these filling out the FAFSA. But we knew that if we just let it go just by the guys at each of the school districts, they would, there's some school districts would think that none of our kids are going to college, why get them to fill out a FAFSA? And what we did is we actually sent them direct emails from our office and said, college is available to you. It looks like you may qualify. Please fill this out. And then we can track by graphically maps and see where the problem places are and then bring in people from the central office, because we're there to help you, to help these guys get to a measure where these kids actually have an opportunity for the American dream. And to me, that's what it's about, helping people with the American dream when they need the help the most. And if you keep that as the center of your vision, then I think we can all prosper together.
Thank you. Yeah,
Going this
please.
way. Okay. Just a couple of things that I would share with you. You all have been successful in your own right, educationally, professionally. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. One of the most difficult parts of leadership that I have noticed across the years is the ability to maintain the sense of urgency that you had early in your career as your personal life allows you to be more comfortable. As you become chancellor or president or whatever title you have, you are disconnected from the average American. And you can lose the focus that you just heard about the American dream from Jim Purcell. In your chair, when you walk into a hotel like this one, don't look for the general manager. Look for the person that's taking care of the food service line. Have a conversation with those people, real Americans who are facing real problems, and understand the challenges that they have, because you know what? It's your job and my job to help them to solve those challenges. Don't allow yourself to be surrounded by an echo chamber that constantly tells you what you want to hear. As the leader, one of the most difficult parts is very few people will tell you the truth. Hire people that will tell you the truth. And talk to people who will tell you the truth about what's going on in their world. I grew up poor. That's no badge of courage. It's just a reality. There are a lot of people who grow up poor. But I don't want to feel like the lottery winner. I want every person out there to have the opportunity that I had to go on, finish an education, and do well for themselves. So it is in your hands. It is a huge burden. We read articles today about no one wants to be a college president. We understand why. It's tough. But together we can. Together we can. As an organization, I will point out one that if you're not familiar with, particularly for those of you in the four-year ranks, Rebuilding America's Middle Class is an organization that we have been part of for now going on 10 years. That organization has fundamentally changed how we go about changing policy. As we look at the business model shifts that we talked about earlier, a big chunk of that comes from the inclusion of Workforce Pell in the America Competes Act. Because here's the fundamental challenge that you have at two-year colleges. Is a student going to show up and pay me $4,200 to learn welding, which is our credit tuition rate, or are they going to show up and pay me $250 to get the American Welding Society certification? Your CFO is probably going to be concerned if you get more of those students showing up for the short-term training program, because you're missing out on the revenue. But what are you really accomplishing on behalf of that individual? When that young person tells you, I ride a bike 2 miles to your college every day, why in the world do we want them to spend 2 years riding a bike to our institution every day? Makes no sense. Get them into the workforce first, then get them back onto the college campus. I urge every one of you walking out of here today, don't lose your sense of urgency. Somewhere there is a mother with a couple of kids at home who's trying to figure out, how do I handle daycare today to get to my job? Don't lose sight of the people who need what we do more than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got about 5 different ideas just kind of going through my head of what I want to say. But I'm thinking about, the way you put this together was, we've got constituents in the audience. I've got 2 presidents and what would I want them to hear? Well, these actually are 2 of our really good presidents.
Yes, they are.
And
Yes, they are.
so I'm not sure it would be the same thing if I was sitting with a broader audience. No, I'm just kidding. But the reality is what I hope for all of our presidents in our system is they see each other as colleagues and as partners. And I can tell you that Kyle Marrero has demonstrated that partnership by allowing staff at his institution to serve as the lead folks to some of our institutions who are having really a lot of problems attracting and retaining. So how do we leverage ourselves as a system and go beyond our own front doors within our system to be able to create an environment where students are getting equitable experiences from one campus to another? Because that is an ideal for us, but it's not always a reality for us. And so as we move forward, what I would say to our presidents is we have got to find every single opportunity to collaborate and do things together as a system, especially when it's work that happens behind the scenes, and move forward on serving those students who are showing up at our front door. On every campus where I've served, I've said, the best and easiest way to grow enrollment is to keep the ones who showed up in the first place. It is a whole lot harder to attract new students than it is to keep students. And our folks in recruitment and admissions say all the time, you know, it is mind-boggling the amount of time and energy we spend to get a student to come to our front door, and then to think that we are not doing all the things to keep them there is it's just mind-boggling for them, and I understand. But as we move forward in our system, I think our hope, and I'm going to have to leave probably right after this because we're pulling our institutions together 2 days this week, 1 day next week, to really talk about how do we become the most efficient in what we do across our institutions so that we can truly, truly be in service to students. So we have CBOs, we've got legal, we've got HR, we've got academic affairs, we've got faculty who are coming to the table to say, how are we going to adjust to this change in paradigm within our individual institutions, but we're having this conversation as a system. And so leveraging each other to the benefit of students is going to be, I think, the driving force for us, at least over the next few years.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause. I think you'll join me in. This is just, again, so appreciative of your time. This is so valuable. The opportunity to bring systems together for you all to talk to each other as colleagues and to share that information is I'm sitting here, as I'm listening to you, I'm sitting here thinking, I thought this was a good idea, and now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is incredible, right? And it's incredible because you agreed to come, and it's incredible because we've had this type of conversation. So appreciative to you. Thank you very much.